Okay, so this now is my turn. I will also briefly introduce my chapter, climate change governments in Taiwan, the transitional gridlock by a high carbon regime. We have two authors, Professor Liu Huamei and I. We cooperated to analyze this situation. Professor Liu Huamei, mainly from legal perspective and mainly from the sociological perspective. So next slide, please. So on the outlines of this chapter, you can see, first of all, we have some theoretical framework for conducting this research. And actually, we engage in more discussion on the past dependency issues. How can the development state actually make transition from the high carbon economic body to the low carbon? So you can see in the section 4, we actually focus on the discussion for the transition leg. So the first of all, we can see we analyze or we explore the situation of high carbon industrial structure. I will introduce that later, and then we also analyze the structure of high carbon energy, sector, in Taiwan. Then we put more discussion to the brown economic package, including the low energy price and the fossil fuel subsidies. So overall, I think this is very similar to South Korea or Japan's situations. I remember in last book, if we have time, we will introduce our last book, Energy Transition in East Asia, published in 2018. The Korea's colleague urged that in South Korea, they have very strong nuclear mafia. And in Japan, they call nuclear bridge. That is to say that those interest groups actually dominate their energy policy. What are the interest group or interest complex? So including scholar, including industry, including technocrats or the retired politician, and also media. So I am very wondering, how can those kinds of society in those very strong nuclear complex domination to transit their society to low carbon situation. I think this is actually go back to Taiwan situation. I think we have also very similar structures. So to the third part of this chapter, we social reasons to the tendency. We demonstrate our survey result on the perception of climate change. This survey is conducted in 2018, and also have some comparison with the survey in 2015 or 2012. This survey shows that the public Taiwan society already have a very strong will, the strong perception that Taiwan has to make progress towards the low carbon economic and society. But relatively, we can see the government. What I would like to analyze in next section, the government actually lack of the very concrete roadmap of the policy implementation. And this is what we see that Kuei-Tien discussed what very, very similar situation in Japan. So in this section, we also actually analyze the contextual environment movement since 1980s. We know since 1980s in Taiwan, we have a lot of the environment movement against petrochemical industry or the chemical industry. So those kinds of the low environmental movement capacity, what the PT cannot actually successfully transfer to the social pressure to the climate governments in Taiwan. So I think this is very also very important situation that because in Taiwan traditionally we see every successful case of the environmental movement actually is focused on a particular event. Those kinds of the events actually occurred firstly locally, then become bigger to the national issue. But anyway, these kinds of the environmental movement actually the components including some of the climate issue, but cannot also very successful transfer to the climate governance. But the successful one is the air pollution movement. The air pollution or the anti-PM 2.5 movement successfully conduct or rather target that our government actually regulated the PM 2.5 small particle pollution at the end of the 2013, I remember. But what is to say, this is movement is actually continue to the capacity of the petrochemical industry plant movement. 反国光石化 in 2010 or 2011. So this is the only one successful case that which from the anti-petrochemical industry movement to the anti-air pollution movement, at the beginning of the 2010s. But now you can see the capacity is still weak. Although we see that there's already some of the climate emergency action also occur in Taiwan comparison to South Korea, what Sam Jun introduced earlier, and to Japan, we still have to move faster. Okay, so the next section of the chapter, we also have the same analysis that the government actually that's clear a roadmap of the climate governance. In this section, I would like to address that actually the Taiwan governments held different kinds of the national energy conference, of the national industrial conference, or national sustainable development conference in responding to different international climate change agreement or protocol. But actually, we like to many document work to do many document work, but the implementation capacity is actually was weak. So we hope that the Thai government actually changed their attitude now. So I think this is the outline of my book. So next slide, please. So you can see this the same slides that I would like to address again, but you see that Taiwan actually is actually the high carbon economic bodies, and we would like to say, according to our political economic structure, we would like to say Taiwan is also a very strong high carbon regime. Actually, work for our governmental development. So how can we change that? This is a big challenge and also a big question, also a big target. Okay, so next slide, please. So next slide. So we can see those kinds of slides. Next slide, please. So we can see that some of the most of the East Asia countries leader already announced the carbon neutral in 2050 or 2060. So that Taiwan's government still hesitate to do that. So according to our understanding, they try to move the now, but according to our perspective, that would be have to make a progress there. So when we go back to the academic analysis, I think this is the structure. How can high carbon economic body can actually overcome its carbon emission structure to low carbon? I think this is actually a very objective structure we have to mobilize. But and then for that, firstly, we can see this is total carbon emission accumulate curve since 1990 to 2016. So you can see the next slide. Next slide. You can see in 1990s, Taiwan's carbon emission is about I think it's about 110 million tons, and until 2016 we have 270 million tons. But you can see the industry occupied helped part. Next slide. And you can see according to precise analysis, you can see this part the industrial carbon emission. You can see the petrochemical contribute the most one. And you can see if we make the detailed analysis that since 1998, the petrochemical industry actually increased their carbon emission, and that's why we are lead the carbon emission of the industrial sector, and again that will lead the total carbon emission of the nation. So so if you go to the detail, you would like to know the formula in the sixth clicker. Actually in 1998 they beginning the first commercial operation of their petrochemical fabric, so increased their carbon emission until 2007 is arrived the peak of the carbon emission. So you can see this is actually the situation. We see that petrochemical industry actually is a big contributor one for the Taiwan carbon emission. But on the other hand, if you to another perspective, our semiconductor or our electronic electronic sector also increased their electricity consumption. Of course, it's equal to they will increase their carbon emission. How can we actually exchange, or how can we actually adjust this kinds of the carbon emissions contribution or the electricity consumption? I think this is a big challenge when we see that the semiconductor industry will be a very important so-called strategic industrial in region or globally for Taiwan. So I think this is very important lesson for Taiwan. We have to think about that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, next slide. So this, go back to that. This slide show that the different big environmental movement since the 1980s. As I said, that is there was a lot of the environmental movement events, anti-chemical industry, even anti-petrochemical industrial issue. But overall, it's what I already said, that the capacity of these kinds of the environmental movement is not successfully or only partly successfully transferred to the climate change governments. Of course, this depends on the issue occurrence in different stage, but actually this is now is the main issues. Now is the main issues of the environmental movement not only in Taiwan, also in region, also in global society. So how can we actually to conduct or to make a new progress? This is very important. So next slide, please. So this slide is what I addressed that our government actually had different kinds of important conference. Yeah, since 1998, you know, was the National Energy Conference had in 1998 in order to respond to the Kyoto Protocol in 1997. What Koichi addressed that the Japanese government had a weak capacity to implement the Kyoto Protocol agreement to their domestic policies. This is the same situation in Taiwan. But what important in Taiwan is actually in 2015, our government passed a new act. Now it's the old act, Greenhouse Gas Emission Reduction and Management Act. According this act, that Taiwan had to reduce their carbon emission in 2030, yeah, back to 2005 baseline minus 20%, and 2050 have to back to 2005 baseline minus 50s. Okay, so I think this is a very old target. Nowadays, every country, yeah, already many countries already announced that in 2050 it's had to be zero emission. So nowadays we know that our EPA now try to revise, try to revise this act, but until now we don't hear many very progressive, target they raised, and on the other hand, we don't see our political leader, like our premier or our president, also have seriously consider this kinds of the policy announcement, because that will influence the act revision. Yeah. So you think this is actually the situation. And the next, okay, I can. So it's the same thing. So this is my last slide, yeah, for the presentation. We can see in Taiwan, yeah, in this chapter, at least we actually analyze or addressed these kinds of points of the industrial position, civil society position, and governmental position. But I think this kinds of analysis until now is still effective. So, our industry, particularly our National Industrial Association, they published, every year the white paper, and still to urge our government should actually take solution for their 5 shortage, issue: shortage of the electricity, shortage of water, shortage of the land, shortage of talent, and shortage of the water, electricity, labor, land, and the talent. But I think it is the pestle issue, because if you, from another perspective, you can see that this kinds of the 5 shortage issue is actually a paradigm of a package, discursive package of the brown economy. So if you go to see another industrial sector, as I said, Taiwan is divided development by the industrial sector. By the energy intensive industry, they like to urge the 5 issue. But for semiconductor, for electronic sector, or for the banking, for the financial sector, which want to actually join the game in regional competition or global competition, they like Taiwan's government to make the regulation, following in the national rule very clearly. So you see that is a very different, it's a divided development. When you go to see some company or some enterprise, they already join TCFD to CTP, some kinds of the carbon emission disclosure. I think it's very important. So on the other hand, your society earlier, they lacked of the strong capacity toward the climate governance. But now there's a bit of change. But in our chapter, we don't have to analyze that too much. For the government, I think the governmental attitude is until now is still vague. They don't have very clear roadmap, very clear scenario where Taiwan actually arrived at the carbon neutrality in 2050, and what is the clear roadmap, and what we cooperated with stakeholder as which addressed. We need participatory governments. We need a stakeholder environment to do that. So we have to still have the very similar situation, Japan, in Taiwan, but South Korea make progress already. Okay, thank you. This is my presentation.